The holidays are over, and that means that it's time for another edition of Fire Emblem Heroes Sleeper Skills, the series where we take a look at skills that can be hard to find a home for. Today we'll be talking about the positional B skills: drag back, knock back, hit and run, and lunge. Positional skills all have a single rank, and with the exception of hit and run, each can be found on at least one 3-star unit. Positionals share a few quirks, so keep these in mind when you're using them. First, they only work on the player phase. Second, they can only be inherited on melee units. Third, positional skills will trigger even if the defender dies. And fourth, these skills cannot create illegal moves. If an illegal move would happen, nothing happens instead. So what do these skills do, and why should we or shouldn't we use them? Drag back pulls both the attacker and the defender backward one space after combat. Knockback pushes the defender backward one space, but does nothing to the attacker. Hit and run will pull the attacker back one space, but does nothing to the defender. And finally, lunge will cause the attacker and defender to swap places after combat. Of the four, I find drag back and hit and run to be the most useful, with lunge having some potential as a disruptive skill on arena defense teams. Knockback works as described, but to be honest, it's very difficult to find a productive use for it at all. The choice between drag back or hit and run comes down to personal preference, but there is something to be said for the consistency that hit and run offers. The positional skills are tactical and conditional. It should come as no surprise then that their usefulness is limited. Even so, they can be valuable additions to your roster as puzzle-solving tools. Sometimes an extra bit of conditional movement can be just enough to get the job done on a particularly challenging map. Positionals work well on melee units with strong player phases. Units with freedom of movement make the best use of positional skills. Naturally, that leads us to flyers and cavalry. Let's look at some builds. As always, these aren't the only builds that use these skills, just a few that I really like. I could probably do an entire video just talking about aggressive melee builds and variations on them, but I'll boil it down to this. Slaying, Fire Sweep, and Brave weapons each have their upsides, and the addition of the Heavy Blade Seal has opened up a ton of new options for player phase melee builds. There's plenty of meaningful differences between the different configurations. I'm just trying to give you some inspiration. Up first we have an aggressive Fire Sweep chassis, using Cordelia as an example. This build relies on phenomenal offensive stats combined with flyer buffs to kill enemies, and then leverages positionals to stay safe or to apply additional pressure. The choice of special comes down to Gale Force or a damaging special. There are plenty of viable A-slot choices like Death Blow, Darting Blow, Swift Sparrow, Life and Death, Heavy Blade, or Fury. In the B slot, we run Hit and Run, Drag Back, or Lunge for positional utility. In the C slot, we run a Flyer buff. If you don't have access to a seasonal mage flyer, I'd lean towards Goads and Wards over Hone and Fortify. Next, let's look at a Brave weapon variant, using Cherche as an example. In the A slot, we run damage enablers, specifically Death Blow. In the B slot, we run positional skills. In the C slot, we use synergy buffs. For the seal, we run something offensive and synergistic: Quick Impulse, Hardy Bearing, Attack, Speed, or Heavy Blade. These builds are both for flying units, but they work perfectly well on cavalry too. Seriously, just copy-paste the build for Cherche onto Frederick, and you're basically good to go. Before we wrap things up, I want to make a note about Gale Force in particular. Gale Force and positionals can work together beautifully, but you need to be very crafty and consciously plan out your actions with the positional triggers in mind. If you can make use of the extra movement, positionals are great. If you can't, you're just going to cannibalize your own Gale Force activations. Basically, be careful if you want to use them both together. Overall, I like the positional skills, even though I don't have too much to say about them. I guess I'm just a sucker for conditionally powerful effects. These skills feel satisfying to use, and they make you care about the map in a way that most other skills don't. They're skills that reward you for playing the game well, and I like that. But these are just my thoughts. Hopefully I did a good job with this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. As always, I hope to see you next time. Take care.